when a wealthy socialite in Greenwich invited her black housemaid son to play chess at a high society gala. It was meant as a joke, a moment of amusement for the guests. But the boy didn't laugh. He sat down, he played, and in 29 silent surgical moves, he dismantled everything they thought they knew about class race and brilliance. What began as an after-dinner insult would unravel reputations, launch a global education movement, and transform a boy raised in the margins into the mind that redefined the game and the world around it. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one they never bothered to prepare for. The clink of champagne flutes and the murmur of old money conversation filled the marble atrium of the Dalton estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. It was the kind of gathering that appeared in luxury lifestyle magazines. Tailored suits, heirloom brooches, foie gras passed around on antique silver trays. Beneath the chandeliers that glittered like fallen stars, the town's elite mingled in effortless coordination. Politicians, art patrons, European diplomats. They weren't networking. They were reaffirming the world they already owned. At the center of it all stood Genevieve Dalton, widowed socialite cultural benefactor, and one of the last true matriarchs of Connecticut's old guard. She wore black silk like it had been woven for her alone, her diamond earrings catching every sliver of light as she tilted her head politely during conversation. To Genevieve, evenings like this were tradition, not indulgence. A reminder of order, of class. Behind the scenes, in crisp white shirts and muted tones, the staff glided along the edges of the room like well-trained shadows. Among them was Lena Brooks, tall, composed, deliberate. She'd worked in the Dalton household for nearly 9 years, and though she wore the uniform, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that often made Genevieve's guests mistake her for someone far more presentable. She was polite, efficient, and most notably invisible when required. Except for tonight, because tonight, Lena had brought someone with her. Her son, 11-year-old Micah Brooks, sat quietly on the bench in the rear service corridor. A paperback copy of Bobby Fischer Teaches Chess, balanced on his knees, his elbows tucked neatly in. He didn't fidget. He didn't ask questions. He observed. That was Micah's gift. He didn't speak much, but he noticed everything. And on that particular night, he noticed that almost every guest who passed by never quite looked his mother in the eyes. They looked through her, like fog on a window. Lena hadn't wanted to bring him. But it was a late evening, and the babysitter had fallen through. She'd asked Genevieve quietly, respectfully, and to her surprise, the woman had waved it off. "Let the boy come," she'd said. "As long as he knows how to keep still." And he had. Until Genevieve saw the book in his hands. Chess. Genevieve smirked. Her late husband had adored the game, considered it the only true measure of intelligence. The chessboard still sat in the salon, inlaid with ivory and ebony pieces carved in Prague. So when the crowd began to thin and the hour turned past 10, she summoned a few guests toward the lounge with a raised hand and a conspiratorial smile. "Let's have some entertainment," she announced. "Bring the chess set." Guests perked up. A few followed out of curiosity. Others because in this house, no one declined Genevieve Dalton's invitations. And while we're at it, she added, her voice floating over the marble like perfume, "Lena, bring your son." Lena froze. Her eyes met Genevieve's, brief, tense, but the woman's expression gave nothing away. "It's only a little fun," she added. "No one's keeping score." Micah looked up from his book as his mother approached. Her face was unreadable. "Micah," she said softly, "they want you to play a game." The boy closed the book slowly, slipping it into his bag. "Do I have to let them win?" he asked quietly. Lena blinked. "No," she whispered. "Just be kind." When he stepped into the Dalton salon, the room quieted slightly. The guests took note the boy's clean polo hand-me-down sneakers, hair neatly combed. He wasn't messy. He was just out of place. "Ah, here's our challenger," Genevieve said, gesturing toward the ornate board already set up in the center of the room. Across from it sat Beaumont, a retired French consul who prided himself on two things, his wine palate and his chess game. He once tied with a Grandmaster, someone murmured. Genevieve raised her flute. And now he shall face Greenwich's youngest talent. Let's see what the boy's made of. There were smile, but not warm ones. The way people smile before a spectacle. Beaumont chuckled as Micah approached. Do you know how the horse moves, mon petit? He asked Faux gently. Yes, Micah said. He sat and made no further comment. The game began, and the room would never be the same again. The pieces clicked softly against the inlaid board as Beaumont opened with a confident king's pawn advance. E4, he said aloud, as though announcing it to an audience that hadn't asked. Micah nodded once and slid his knight forward. An F6, several guests murmured. A few tilted their heads. It was an unusual first response, aggressive but controlled. Beaumont raised an eyebrow. Ah, the Alekhine defense, he said with theatrical flair. Someone has been reading. Micah said nothing. He didn't blink, didn't fidget. He just watched. Like the entire room was a chessboard, and he was already 50 moves ahead. The game continued, each move faster than the last. Genevieve leaned against the grand piano, swirling the champagne in her flute, her voice low and silken. Well, I must say, he has more composure than some of our board members. A ripple of polite laughter echoed, but not from Lena. She stood near the back hands, folded her spine straight, every instinct in her body urging her to step forward and stop this. But Micah hadn't even flinched. He moved like he belonged here, not just in the room, but at the board. By move 12, Beaumont began to slow down. By move 16, he frowned. A small crowd had begun to gather guests, who previously sipped wine with idle smiles, now leaned forward, glasses untouched. Micah moved his bishop quiet, precise. Beaumont stared at the board longer than necessary. He muttered. Didn't expect that. He reached for his queen, hesitated, then pulled back. Micah waited, still and silent. Beaumont tried to reset his confidence, launching a counterattack, pushing pawns toward the center, like a man determined not to be embarrassed. But Micah didn't react. He dismantled the structure piece by piece. Clean, mathematical, merciless. By move 25, Beaumont scratched his temple. By move 28, he sat back blinking. Genevieve approached, peering over the board. What's the matter, darling? She asked lightly. Is the child too quick for you? There was a pause, longer than etiquette allowed. Then click. Micah moved his rook. Check. Beaumont's face fell. He looked at the board, then at the boy, as though hoping it was some mistake. It wasn't. Micah leaned slightly forward. His voice was soft, polite. You can resign now. Gasps spread like a shock wave. Someone actually choked on their drink. Genevieve's smile faltered. Beaumont stared at the board. He scanned it once, then again, then stood slowly, stiffly. He extended his hand. Well played, he said, voice thin. Micah shook it, then turned to Genevieve. May I go back to my book now? Genevieve tried to collect herself. Yes, she said. Of course. Micah turned and walked quietly back toward the corridor where he'd been reading like none of it mattered. But it did. The guests remained silent, eyes still locked on the board like they were afraid to breathe too loudly. And Genevieve, she stood there in the glow of her chandeliers, still smiling. But something behind her eyes had changed. Micah Brooks wasn't just a maid's son. He was a mirror. And everyone in that room had just seen their own reflection, distorted, unkind, and utterly unprepared. The clip surfaced online the next morning. No one knew who had filmed it. Perhaps one of the guests, perhaps a caterer. But someone had captured the moment Micah Brooks leaned across the ornate chessboard and calmly, unmistakably said, "You can resign now." The video was only 41 seconds long. But by noon, it had been reposted by a popular chess influencer. By sundown, it was trending worldwide. Who is the boy who humiliated a diplomat in front of Greenwich's elite? One headline asked. Child prodigy from the back room. Outsmarts old money, another wrote. There was no formal press release, no interviews. Just a few seconds of brilliance delivered without ego in a room not built for boys like him. At the Dalton estate, Genevieve stood in her sunroom, phone in hand, watching the clip for the 7th time. Her lips were pressed into a line. Her legacy, decades of careful social positioning, of curating the idea of refinement, now overshadowed by an 11-year-old child who had walked out of her kitchen and redefined the room. She didn't hate the boy. She hated that she hadn't seen him coming. Across town, in a modest kitchen filled with the scent of roasted rosemary and garlic, Lena Brooks stirred dinner in silence. Micah sat at the small table reading. He hadn't said much since the game. He didn't need to. The world was already saying it for him. Roy, Lena's older brother, tapped his phone, scrolled through the comments on the video, and whistled low. "Micah," he said, setting the phone down. "Did you really beat a French diplomat in 29 moves?" Micah shrugged. "It should have been 24. He just made it messy." Lena turned from the stove, eyebrows lifted. "We talked about humility, remember?" "I was being accurate," Micah said. "Not rude." Roy grinned. "Fair point." But Lena wasn't smiling. "People are watching now," she said. "They'll expect things. And they'll assume things." Micah looked up, meeting her eyes. "I didn't ask to be famous." "I know, baby. But sometimes fame doesn't ask your permission either." She set a plate in front of him and smoothed his collar instinctively. The ring of her phone interrupted the quiet. She glanced at the screen. "Unknown number," she answered cautiously. A clipped professional voice spoke on the other end. "Miss Brooks, this is Christopher Vaughn with the National Scholastic Chess Foundation. We saw what your son did last night. We'd like to talk." By the end of the week, the Brooks household had received 15 calls. Private schools, tech startups, documentary producers, even a representative from the U.S. Chess Federation requesting Micah's participation in an invitational tournament in Washington, D.C. And with each offer, Lena's hands trembled just a little more. She had worked her entire life to make her son invisible to danger. But now the spotlight wasn't just on him, it was blazing. Meanwhile, at the Dalton estate, Genevieve stood in the solarium with Senator Fields and a few close allies. The tone was subdued. "Is it true," the senator asked, "that you invited the boy to be mocked as entertainment?" Genevieve didn't answer immediately. Instead, she sipped her tea. The porcelain rattled softly in its saucer. "We assumed it would be amusing," she admitted. "No one expected," she trailed off. Fields raised an eyebrow. "No one expected a child from the servants' corridor to be a genius." Genevieve looked up sharply. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." The room fell still, because they all knew what had happened wasn't just a social faux pas. It was a revelation, one that cracked the illusion they'd curated for generations, that brilliance had a bloodline and talent obeyed invitations. Micah hadn't knocked on their door. He'd simply walked through it. And now they had to decide, welcome the future or cling to a fading past. The tournament hall in Washington, D.C. was nothing like the drawing rooms of Greenwich. There were no crystal chandeliers, no silk gloves or whispered gossip, just rows of tables, cool white lighting, and the quiet hum of clocks ticking between brilliant minds. Micah sat at table 7. His blazer didn't quite fit. It was borrowed, and the collar of his shirt kept folding awkwardly, no matter how many times his mother had ironed it that morning. But none of that mattered. In front of him was a board, and across from him sat his first opponent, a blonde-haired boy from New York, with a prep school badge stitched onto his sleeve, and the same practiced smile Genevieve Dalton had worn at her dinner parties. "You're the kid from the video, right?" the boy said as he adjusted his pieces. "The Maid's son." Micah didn't blink. He just moved his pawn to e4. "Your move." The boy smirked. "Cool. I'm going to enjoy this." What followed wasn't a game. It was a warning. Micah dismantled his position in 22 moves. Surgical, silent, no flair, just discipline. He stood and walked away before the arbiter even announced the result. His next opponent, a regional champion from Pennsylvania, then another. A girl from Berlin, then a boy from Mumbai. Each one underestimated him, only once. By the end of the day, the scoreboard showed a single name in bold at the top: Micah Brooks. 6 wins, 0 losses. Lena watched from the far end of the gallery, hands clasped in front of her, trying to hold back the tide of emotion rising in her throat. She wasn't used to watching her son be seen, really seen, not pitied, Not tokenized, not ignored, but recognized. It was a terrifying kind of joy. That night, back at the modest hotel room they shared, Micah sat cross-legged on the bed, replaying every match in his head. "Do you think they like me now?" he asked, not looking up. Lena glanced up from folding his tournament badge into her purse. "Who?" "The people who laughed at me in Greenwich." She sat beside him. "Sweetheart, they never laughed at you." Micah turned. "They laughed at who they thought you were. And then you taught them they were wrong." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't mean to make them look bad. You didn't. They just weren't ready." Lena nodded. "They were never going to be." Micah leaned his head on her shoulder. "I don't want to be famous." "I know. I just want to win." Lena smiled, kissing the top of his head. "Then play like you've already won. But walk like you have nothing to prove." By the final day of the tournament, the buzz had gone national. Reporters hovered near the doors. Spectators lined the walls. Some had come to watch a boy win. Others came hoping he would fall. But Micah didn't notice the crowd. He noticed the board. His final match was against a 17-year-old Russian phenom, tall, composed, part-time model, and full-time wunderkind who had already been offered a spot at Oxford. The boy looked Micah up and down. "You are the American boy, yes?" Micah nodded. "My grandmother saw you on the news," the Russian continued. "She said you play like someone who's hiding something." Micah's fingers hovered above the pawn. "I'm not hiding," he said. "I'm learning how to be seen." Then he moved. The game lasted 94 minutes. Spectators held their breath. Analysts whispered in hallways. Cameras zoomed in on every beat of sweat, every twitch of thought. But Micah played like the game wasn't happening in front of anyone. It was just him, and the logic of the board, and the truth of the moment. And when his opponent finally tipped his king over slowly, with quiet respect, the room erupted. Some cheered. Some just sat in stunned silence, because a boy who wasn't supposed to be there had just won the National Youth Championship. Without shouting, without spectacle, just strategy, grace, and something rarer than talent. Control. Later, as the cameras swarmed and the first microphones were thrust in his face, someone shouted, "What do you want to say to the world, Micah?" The boy looked straight ahead, not defiant, not angry, just clear. "Maybe next time," he said, "you'll ask what my name is before you decide who I'm allowed to be." Then he turned and walked toward his mother, the only audience he had ever played for. The invitations came like a flood, and interviews, sponsorships, scholarships, documentary pitches. Even a glossy email from a luxury school in Switzerland offering Micah a full ride and a personal driver. Lena stared at the emails, her jaw tight. She hadn't even unpacked the suitcase from D.C. before the world decided her son now belonged to them. Micah sat at the kitchen table playing blitz games online. He didn't look up when she walked in, but she knew he could feel the shift in the air. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "can we talk?" He nodded and finished the game with a final ruthless queen sacrifice. "They want us to move to Europe," she said, scrolling through the email again. "Genevieve Dalton's foundation is offering a stipend. They say it's an opportunity." Micah tilted his head. "For me or for them?" Lena set the phone down. "Both," she admitted. Micah stared at the chessboard in front of him, not the physical one, but the one in his mind. Life, like chess, was becoming a game of positioning. He had always known how to read the board, but now the pieces were people, and that made the game harder. 3 days later, they flew to New York for a feature on national television. The studio was polished and bright with polished hosts, an even more polished smile. They greeted Lena like a novelty and Micah like a brand. "Tell us, Micah," the host said, gesturing to the cameras. "How does it feel to be the most brilliant kid in America?" Micah shifted slightly in his seat. "I don't know," he said. "I've never been anyone else." The audience laughed, not cruelly, but not kindly either, as if they weren't laughing with him, but at the surprise that he had said something so sharp. After the show, they were ushered into a green room where bottled water cost more than Lena's shoes. A producer approached, holding a glossy proposal. "Netflix wants to talk," he said. "A mini-series, your rise, the Dalton match, the DC Championship." We'll get a director, maybe a young actor, to play you." Micah looked up from his sketchbook. He had been designing a new chess opening with a hybrid of London and Queen's Gambit. "Will I get to play myself?" he asked. The producer blinked. "What?" "In the show," Micah said. "Can I be me?" There was a long pause. "Then we'll get back to you on that." That night, back in their hotel, Lena finally broke. She closed the laptop, silenced her phone, and sat across from Micah with tears in her eyes. "I don't know if I can protect you from this." Micah didn't answer at first. Then he said softly, "You don't have to protect me, Mom. Just stand with me." Lena reached across the table and held his hand. His fingers were long, soft from calculation, not from play. "You know what scares me," she whispered. "That they only love you because you embarrassed the wrong person. Because you were useful to the story they wanted to tell." Micah looked her in the eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she saw not her little boy, but a young man rising inside him. "Then I'll write my own story." The next day, Lena made a decision. They declined the documentary deal, turned down the Swiss school, and instead, she filed paperwork to start something Micah had quietly drawn up in a leather notebook, the Open Board Initiative, a program to teach strategic thinking through chess in underfunded schools and underserved communities. Micah didn't want to be anyone's mascot. He wanted to be a mentor, not a viral headline, a blueprint. Weeks later, in a sunlit library in Brooklyn, he sat across from a kid named Elijah, 9 years old, shy, always looking down. Micah leaned forward and pointed to the bishop. "What does this piece see that others don't?" Elijah looked up curious. "The diagonal?" "Exactly," Micah said. "It moves differently. That doesn't make it wrong. It makes it powerful." Elijah smiled. And somewhere in the back of the room, Lena watched her son begin to rewrite the world. Not with cameras, but with conversation. Not on a red carpet, but across worn chessboards in forgotten rooms, where brilliance had always lived, just waiting for someone to see it. It had been exactly 89 days since Micah Brooks sat across from a diplomat and dismantled a room full of assumptions. 89 days since Genevieve Dalton's smirk was quietly erased by a boy she never expected to matter. And now she was back. The envelope arrived on a Thursday afternoon, sealed with Dalton House's custom gold wax. Inside, on thick cream stationery written in calligraphy, were the words, "The Dalton Foundation cordially invites Mr. Micah Brooks and Ms. Lena Brooks to the Greenwich Springs Social and Alumni Gala." Lena stared at the invitation in silence. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a summons dressed in politeness. "Do you want to go?" she asked Micah that evening, holding the envelope like a lit match. Micah didn't look up from his board. "I want them to see what it looks like when you play for the people they never invited." The night of the gala was soft with mist and early magnolias. The Dalton estate shimmered beneath strings of golden lights restored and rehearsed to perfection. Inside, guests clinked crystal and murmured about stocks, art acquisitions, and board seats. No one expected to be surprised. And then they walked in. Lena wore deep green, simple, elegant, deliberate. Micah followed behind her in a charcoal suit, nothing flashy but cut to fit. He wasn't the boy from the service corridor anymore. He was the one they'd all watched on national television. Conversations stalled, eyes turned. Genevieve Dalton stood near the marble fireplace, glass of Merlot in hand, and greeted them with the same smile she'd used on foreign ambassadors. "Lena," she said, "you look different." "I am," Lena replied evenly. "So is my son." Genevieve glanced at Micah, offering her hand. "Micah, you've had quite the season." Micah shook it. Brief, polite. "I've had better games." A polite laugh rustled among the nearby guests, uncertain whether they were allowed to laugh with him yet. Genevieve gestured toward the adjoining room. "We've set up a casual exhibition board. Just for fun, of course. Would you humor us with a game?" Micah tilted his head. "With you." Genevieve's smile thinned. "Unless you're afraid." Lena opened her mouth to object, but Micah touched her elbow. "It's okay, Mom." He turned back to Genevieve. "White or black?" She sipped her wine. "Ladies first." Micah nodded. "You can go first." The board was set. Guests circled drinks in hand, anticipation building. It wasn't about the match. It never was. It was about power. But Micah didn't play for power. He played for clarity. Genevieve opened classically. E4. Micah answered. C5. Sicilian defense. He was faster now. Not rude, just efficient. He had no need to impress anyone. By move 8, Genevieve's fingers hesitated. By move 12, a bead of sweat formed at her temple. By move 16, the crowd had gone quiet. And by move 21, Micah slid his knight, tapped the table lightly, and said, check. Genevieve stared. The board was hopeless. There was no saving face. No comeback line. Only resignation. Micah sat back calm. You're welcome to rematch, he said. But next time, don't assume I'm here to entertain you. He stood. Genevieve remained seated, hand frozen over her king. It didn't matter whether she tipped it over. Everyone in the room already knew it had fallen. Afterward, as Lena and Micah walked toward the exit, a few guests stepped forward, not with pity, not with charity, but with respect, real respect. Mr. Brooks once said quietly, if you ever decide to coach, my daughter could use someone like you. Micah smiled faintly. I'll think about it. Outside, beneath the night air, heavy with wisteria, Lena looked at her son. Why did you do it? Micah's voice was soft. Because when someone writes you off as a footnote, you don't argue. You just write the next chapter. Spring turned to summer, and in a quiet corner of Brooklyn, the first open-board initiative classroom opened its doors. It was nothing like the galleries Micah had played in. No mahogany paneling, no crystal chandeliers, just scuffed desks, sun-worn windows, and a floor that creaked in rhythm with the subway 2 blocks away. But every seat was filled. The children came from every direction. Brownsville East, Harlem, Newark, some by bus, some by foot, many trailing behind parents who looked at the building like it was too good to be real. Inside, Micah stood in front of them, not as a champion, as a mirror. You don't have to play like me, he told the room. You just have to think like you matter. A boy in the front row raised his hand timid. But how do we win if no one expects us to? Micah's reply was quiet but firm. Exactly like that. Over the next few weeks, open board chapters began popping up in unexpected places, church basements, rec centers, even in the back corner of a barbershop in Baltimore. All connected, all free, and Micah traveled between them with his mother. Sometimes they slept on air mattresses, sometimes in donated guest rooms. But every time he unpacked his chess set, kids gathered like it was treasure, because to them it was. They weren't being taught how to win tournaments. They were being taught how to anticipate, adapt, recognize patterns, skills no one ever thought to teach them before. Back in Greenwich, the Dalton Foundation was undergoing a quiet reinvention, or at least trying to. Under public scrutiny, after the viral match and mounting pressure from donors, Genevieve had stepped down from several committees, but not all. She still moved among the old circles, still hosted luncheons, but her name, once whispered with admiration, was now spoken with caution. And then one day she did something no one expected. She wrote a letter, not to Micah, to Lena. Ms. Brooks, I've had many rooms taken from me in my life. Social rooms, political rooms, financial rooms. But that salon the night your son beat Mr. Beaumont, that was the first time I realized I had never truly owned a room at all. You and your son changed something I can't undo. But I would like to contribute to what you're building. No press, no photos, just the check enclosed. Use it however you see fit. Respectfully, G.D. Lena read the letter twice, then set it down unopened check beside it. Micah glanced up from across the room. You gonna cash it? Lena shook her head slowly. I think we'll make her wait. 2 weeks later, Lena received another letter. This time from someone she hadn't seen in over a decade. Clarence Mayweather, the headmaster of Dalton Preparatory Academy. She had once worked there as a janitor. Now he was asking if she'd be interested in joining the board. They want you now? Roy said, reading the letter over her shoulder. After all these years? They're reconsidering diversity goals, Lena replied. Roy snorted. Or covering their backs. She looked at the letter again. Thought of the countless floors she'd mopped while overhearing faculty meetings behind closed doors. Thought of the security guard who once followed her for wandering too close to the admissions office. Then she folded the letter. "I'll go," she said, "but I won't sit quietly." Micah smiled. "You never have." That fall, the Open Board Initiative held its first inner-city youth exhibition in Central Park. Hundreds of kids showed up. Some barely old enough to tie their shoes, others already designing their own tactics. Micah didn't compete. He walked between boards, offering quiet advice, encouragement, and sometimes just presence. He knew what it meant to be seen by someone who understood. After the final round, a young girl named Jada tugged at his sleeve. She held up a small gold pawn she'd been given. "It's not a trophy," she said, "but it's the first time I ever won anything." Micah knelt so they were eye level. "It's not about what you win," he said. "It's about what you learn while you're trying." She nodded. "Next year," she whispered, "I'm coming for your title." Micah grinned. "I hope you do." Autumn found them in Amsterdam. The invitation had come from the European Chess Federation, not for a tournament, but a prestige exhibition meant to showcase rising talent from around the globe. No trophies, no rankings. Just the best young minds across every continent seated at the same boards. Micah almost said no. He didn't need the spotlight. He'd already proven enough. But Lena gently encouraged him. "Not everyone in the world is looking to use you," she said. "Some are just hoping to learn from you." So they went. And on a crisp October morning, Micah stood beneath the vaulted glass ceiling of the Rijksmuseum's atrium, where 20 elegant tables had been arranged beneath the light of 1,000 years of art and history. The audience wore turtlenecks and soft scarves, coffee cups in hand, press badges tucked discreetly behind leather lanyards. It was a quieter kind of wealth than Greenwich, less performative, but just as careful. Micah, dressed in a simple navy sweater and slate-gray trousers, blended in better now, but he still felt the stare when he sat down, not because of how he looked, but because of who he was. The American. The viral one. The kid who made power look unprepared. His first match was against a Ukrainian girl named Katerina, graceful, fast, methodical. She never spoke a word but smiled softly when he countered her trap without blinking. Second was against a boy from Ghana, lean and sharp, who whispered, "Let's make this look good." They did, drawing 37 moves. Third was against a French-Cambodian prodigy whose mother had coached her to use chess as a form of poetry. Every move had rhythm, and Micah had to work for every breath. By the end of the day, Micah had played 9 games, won 6, drew 3, and more importantly, no one had asked him if he belonged. Not once. That evening, he and Lena walked along the quiet canals of the Jordan district. The air smelled like rain and wood smoke. The water reflected soft lights from bicycles and cafes. Lena held a paper bag of pastries in one hand, her other tucked into her coat. "Feels like another world," she said. Micah nodded. No one stared. They did. Just differently. He glanced at her. "What do you mean?" "They looked at you like you were rare, not strange." Micah let that settle. "I think I'm still figuring out the difference." They reached a bench overlooking the water. Lena sat first. Micah followed. "It ever scare you?" he asked. "How far we've come." She smiled gently. "Every day." But also, no. Micah leaned back, watching the reflection of the stars ripple in the water. "I don't want to just be a story," he said quietly. "You're not," Lena replied. "You're a beginning." 2 days later, after the exhibition concluded, Micah was presented with a framed invitation. Not to another match, but to join the European Youth Chess Council as its youngest ever advisor. It wasn't about playing anymore. It was about shaping the future of the game. Micah looked at the document, then at Lena, and she knew his answer before he said a word. Because somewhere between Greenwich and Amsterdam, her son had stopped asking if he belonged and started deciding where he would lead. The plane touched down in New York just after midnight. Micah stared out the oval window at the runway lights blinking softly in the mist. Behind him, The world of Amsterdam faded into memory. Quiet bridges, respectful nods, no cameras. Ahead of him, America waited, and with it noise. By the time they reached their apartment in Brooklyn, there were already 3 voicemail messages waiting. One was from a well-known sportswear brand offering Micah a limited edition chess-inspired shoe line. The second from a senator's office requesting a meeting about public education reform. And the third was from Dalton House. Genevieve Dalton's voice was unmistakable. Calm, deliberate, a little older now, and maybe just barely softer. Lena, I'm calling with no expectation, only acknowledgement. You and your son, you changed more than that room. I'd like to invite you both back. As my guests, not staff. There's a lecture series. Youth Brilliance and Strategy. You'd be the keynote. If you say no, I'll understand. But I'd still like to say thank you for showing me what I refused to see. Lena didn't replay the message. She didn't have to. She stood in the kitchen that morning, stirring coffee, staring out the window as the city yawned awake, thinking of her first day scrubbing Dalton's marble floors when Micah was still in diapers, and she was invisible. Now they were asking her to speak. She turned to her son. What do you think? Micah looked up from a letter he'd received from one of the open board chapters in Atlanta, a boy who had just beaten his high school principal in under 18 moves. I think we don't go back to apologize, Micah said. We go back to tell the truth. Lena nodded. That's what I needed to hear. The event was held 3 weeks later in the Dalton Conservatory, the same room where Lena once polished silver until her hands cracked. This time she wore a deep blue dress and soft leather heels. No name tag, no tray. Micah sat in the front row. The audience was a mix of prep school students, professors, donors, and a few familiar faces, older now, perhaps more thoughtful. Genevieve Dalton sat in the second row listening. Lena stepped up to the microphone. There was no script, just memory. She spoke not of anger, but of perspective. Not of revenge, but of clarity. I've spent most of my life in rooms that weren't built for me, she said. And that's okay. I wasn't raised to expect a stage. But my son taught me that sometimes, when a door doesn't open for you, you walk in anyway. And if that makes people uncomfortable, good. Comfort never changed anything. She looked at Micah. Strategy isn't just about knowing where to move. It's about knowing why you're moving. And who's watching? The audience stood when she finished. Even Genevieve. And that was enough. Outside in the courtyard where old vines curled up stone walls, Micah leaned against the iron gate, holding the invitation letter in his hand. Lena joined him. Do you think she meant it? He asked. Genevieve. Micah nodded. That's not really the point, Lena replied. She didn't have to. He looked at her. You're not mad. Lena smiled just barely. I'm not here to carry her guilt. I'm here to carry our future. Micah folded the letter. Then let's get back to work. The offer came in an embossed envelope, delivered by hand to their Brooklyn apartment. Inside a letter from the World Youth Strategy Council, inviting Micah to join as their youngest ever chairperson. Not honorary, not symbolic, a real seat, with real influence. It came with global travel, a full-time staff, and a stipulation Micah would need to step back from day-to-day work with open board. Micah read the letter 3 times, then folded it, laid it on the kitchen table, and stared out the window at the schoolyard across the street, where a little girl stood at the edge of the monkey bars, calculating whether she could make the jump. Lena watched him from the doorway. You don't have to say yes, she said quietly. Power doesn't always come with a title. Micah nodded. But sometimes, it gives you a microphone. He accepted, but only after rewriting the rules. He'd chair the council remotely half the year, and the other half, he'd stay on the ground, working directly with students through open board. They can't make the decisions without hearing the kids they're deciding for, he told the director. I'm not leaving the table. I'm bringing more chairs. It wasn't what they expected, but they agreed, because they needed him more than he needed them. At the official appointment ceremony in Geneva, Micah stood before a sea of leaders, educators, youth organizers, and translators humming in their glass booths. He wore no tie, Just a clean black jacket, and the same watch his mother had saved up for with tips from her last year at Dalton House. He didn't start with a speech. He started with a question. How many of you learned how to lose? The room went still. Micah paused, then continued. I ask because I didn't. I learned how to win. Quickly. Quietly. So I could survive the rooms I was never supposed to enter. But I think it's time we teach young people that strength isn't just measured by victories. It's in how we carry ourselves after failure, how we treat others when we're ahead, and how we really listen when someone different from us speaks up. He looked directly into the crowd. I was never trying to be the smartest person in the room. I just wanted the room to be big enough for people like me to sit down. And with that, he became not just a strategist, but a storyteller, a symbol, a guide. Months passed, then years. Open Board grew into a global network of youth-led mentorship programs. More than chess, more than logic. It became a way for kids to learn their own value, to anticipate, to observe, to lead. Lena watched it all unfold with a heart full of quiet awe. Not because her son had become famous, but because he had become exactly who he was always meant to be. One evening, long after the world had settled down again, she found Micah in their now larger home. Not a mansion, not a palace. Just a warm, well-worn place filled with books, friends, and light. He was sitting at the dining table, teaching a child to play. The boy was nervous, awkward. Micah smiled. Let me tell you a secret, he said gently. There's no such thing as the wrong piece, only the wrong way of looking at the board. Lena turned away so they wouldn't see her cry, not because she was sad, but because sometimes, when the world once tried to write you off, there is no greater power than rewriting the ending and watching someone else begin the next story because you dared to live yours. From a quiet corner of a ballroom in Greenwich to international stages and classrooms around the world, Micah Brooks didn't just change the way people play the game. He changed who gets invited to the table. This wasn't a story about revenge. It was a story about visibility, about grace, resilience, and knowing your worth even when the world forgets to ask your name. And if this story moved you the way it moved us, we invite you to stick around. Subscribe for more powerful, true, inspired stories about underestimated voices, hidden brilliance, and the quiet revolutions that begin with one brave move. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay sharp, stay kind, and never be afraid to rewrite the board.